The Still Loading podcast is brought to you by the wonderful people on Patreon. Amazing people like Melissa S., Dennis S., Pib Extra, Parallax Puddles, Ryan K., Doug from the Nostalgia Marcanon podcast, Kevin from the Bit by Bit Foundation, Matt aka Stormageddon, Gilmer, Stephen P., and Mr. Biscuits have all been wonderful enough to support the show over there. So if you would also like to get your name read at the beginning of an episode, along with a bunch of other goodies, go over to patreon.com/stillloadingpod and check out everything it has to offer. On this episode of Still Loading, Paul Rudd, where you at? Hello, everyone, and welcome to this new episode of the Still Loading podcast. I'm your host, Josh Koval, and today's episode, we are diving into a console retrospective. It's been a minute since I've done a deep dive on an individual console. I can't even remember the last one I did. It might have been fucking I genuinely don't remember. It's been a while, so it's overdue. Actually, you know what? That's a lie. I did the DS one last year because it was like 2004, and so it was 2020. It was 20 years of the DS last year. So I did the DS last year. My memory is already so bad. But I'm here today with two wonderful guests to talk about the Super Nintendo, aka the Super Famicom, which for some reason I always do this by the Japanese release date instead of the one that's probably going to get me more downloads, the North American one. It's now been 40 years since the release of the Super. 40 is my math? No, 30 years since the release of the Super Famicom. No, what? I'm losing 35.
Split
35.
the difference, 35.
Jesus, goddamn Christ! 35 years since, and that was 1990. I'm losing the thread already. And those two wonderful voices you heard, helping me keep my sanity just a little bit longer before I completely screw this up further. We're going to start off actually with the more recent returning guest, someone who was on just last year, Dan Greenberg from Winter Ion Gaming.
Hey, how's it going?
Thank you once again for joining me, Dan. Always a pleasure having you on the podcast. We were talking off mic that the last time you were on was Dragon Quest III, so it's been over a year since you've been on the show.
Too long.
It has been too long. I'm going to have to find more excuses to have you back on. And it's speaking of someone who I need more excuses to have back on the show, someone who's been gone from the show even longer. Their first time on the show was all the way back on the original Final Fantasy Draft, before we even had a listener voting to determine who won the draft. The first time guest on there, Nadia Oxford from the Axe of the Blood God podcast, from Retronauts, among many other places. Nadia, how are you doing today?
Hey, I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Happy to have you back on the show. Like I said, it's been way too damn long. Been looking forward to this. Been looking forward to this all week since we kind of set this up. And I think the last time I saw you was actually at Retro World Expo like 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Gosh, it's been it's hard to think about it, that it's been that long. It just doesn't feel that way. But when you said that the SNES was 40 years old, I nearly had a heart attack.
Yeah, no, my math was way off. It's 35. It's 35, okay. Y'all.
I'm still having a heart attack, but it's not as bad.
Just a little bit better. What is it? Someone posted in my Discord that from the age the NES was when the Wii came out is the same that the Wii is to now, if that makes sense.
Those are good memes for making you feel like you're about to die.
Yes, very much so. And when I my only response to that was just, God damn it! Like, why are you doing this to me? Why are you doing this to me?
Hank Hill glaring at his computer.
Dang it, Bobby. Why are you doing this to me? But no, thank you both so much for coming on the show. We are here to talk about Super Nintendo. It is a phenomenal system, and I have two phenomenal guests to discuss this. So, as we, of course, do with all of these console retrospective episodes, we're going to talk about our personal experiences. And Nadia, since it's been a long time since you've been on the show, I want to kick it off with you. What's some of your earliest memories with the Super Nintendo? Just kind of some of your earliest memories or impressions surrounding the system.
It's funny. I got the SNES quite late in its life. I would say not until '93, and basically I was getting into the NES when all the rich kids, if you will, were getting into the SNES. So my real first impressions of it, I suppose, were like commercials of a system that I could not have, which made me kind of jealous, of course. But what are you gonna do? But when I actually played the Super Nintendo for the first time, it had come out recently-ish to North America, and a friend of mine had rented it and invited me over. And my parents we were moving houses, like to a new house just down the street, actually. And I said, like, if I work real hard, can I go to so and so's house and like play Super Nintendo? And my mom actually relented, because I think she was just like, whatever, we're moving. I don't care if you disappear into the ether right now. Just let's just get this done.
Give me some peace of mind.
Yeah. So yeah, I went to my parents' house and I saw Super Nintendo, and I saw specifically Super Mario World and Vanilla Dome, which is such a cool. Like, notice the first thing I noticed was like, okay, yeah, you had your map screen the way you had it in like Mario 3, but it was so much more 3D. It was had much more pop and just so much more depth, and I was just really impressed by that. So that was, I guess that was my first impression of the SNES, just thinking as a kid, like, oh, it can't get better than, like, Mario 3 graphics. Then, like, oh, yeah, it can, actually. It really can.
And then you're like, it can't get better than Mario World graphics. And
it didn't.
It didn't. You're right. You're right. I'm wrong.
And, man, I still stand by that. I think Mario World has some of the best looking pixel art, especially considering how early in the system it was.
Did you see that recent thing I don't know if it was by Super Mario Bros. On Blue Sky, just mentioning how there's so many different art styles going on in Super Mario World that it's actually insane how there's no unification between like 3 or 4 different pixel styles they're using there. Like,
really?
Some enemies have like no outlines, some have really thick black outlines, some are shaded, like donut shading, some are shaded, like.
Yeah, they were theorizing that, like, because of the additional Mario models, there was some internal debate about, like, even what the core art direction was going to be, and they ended up just using all of it.
Yeah, it's really cool, really interesting. Very, very unique looking game, I'll say that much.
Absolutely, absolutely. Dan, what about you? Earliest Super Nintendo memories or impressions?
Kind of the opposite in a funny way. I grew up with a brother who was 8 years older than me. And we didn't have a lot of money early on. My dad bartended, my mom cleaned houses. So, like, we had a Commodore 64 because anyone could afford one of those back then.
Good stuff.
Our neighbors actually had, I think, an Amstrad and a Specky.
Really?
So, like, I got some really weird early gaming exposure.
Were they from the UK? Or
yeah, no. They were from France, but they got it in the UK and they were using it. We were here in the US. So those, and then a 2600. And so I didn't get an NES until 89. So I was a little late on that. But I had played it and I got hooked to it. And so when the SNES came out, in late 91 here, that was like the super excited, had to get it. It was the only thing I was interested in. And some combination of Santa and the parents relented. So Holiday 91 got it, along with Super Mario World, F-Zero, and Pilot Wings, I think, were the 3.
Oh, that's a good spread.
And I lost F-Zero the next day.
What?
Somehow, I don't know what happened, but I think what happened is I was so excited to get the system. I took the system of my games over to my best friend's house, who was 3 doors down. And we played it there, and then I brought all my stuff back to my place the day after, and we couldn't find the F-Zero card at my place. We couldn't find the F-Zero card at their place. Just vanished into the ether. So
see, that happens to me too. People don't believe me, but I've lost games like that. They just disappeared or maybe got stolen, but I don't know. They just up and left, like grew legs and took off because, I don't know, they're pilot wings. They got a room.
Now, are you sure your friend didn't just take it?
Yeah, no, they're good. They're good souls. I've never once suspected that they did, but it made F-Zero this like, ooh, I can't wait till I get to play it again. Like that was fun. I hope I get a chance to own that in a few months. My birthday rolls around.
It was your white whale for a while.
I can't remember. Are either of you Canadian?
No.
Okay.
No, I just play hockey.
I wish.
We have this.
We both love hockey. That is true. Dan and I are both big hockey fans.
Oh, well, that's good enough. But we have this like cultural icon called the Littlest Hobo, who's a dog. It was kind of a Lassie like show that was produced and made in Canada. And the idea was there was a German Shepherd that would find a problem and solve the problem at the end of the episode. It would just kind of wander on and find another person he couldn't settle down. That was his whole thing. He had to go from place to place to help people. And maybe that's what happened to your F-Zero cartridge. Maybe it's helping.
I'm needed elsewhere.
Maybe it's saving a baby from a burning building somewhere.
Next time you go traveling to a con, you're going to see an F-Zero cart with like a bindle on strapped to it.
You're looking.
I want to settle down.
That's really funny. For myself, I actually missed out on the entirety of it when it was contemporary. I was born in '89. I would have been old enough to have one. Like if I was like 5 or 6 years old, I feel like that's when kids start getting into games and whatnot.
Yeah.
And I remember playing like the Sega Genesis a ton. My neighbor had a Sega Genesis. And I did play a little bit of the Super Nintendo. I remember being over at a church friend's house, and I think they had a Super Nintendo, but at the time I didn't know the differences between NES and Super Nintendo and all this other stuff. So I know we played Super Mario World and Super Mario 3 and the original Super Mario Brothers. And I understood they were all different Mario games, but I didn't quite understand how they were all different Mario games. It just kind of like blended all together with just not understanding the logistics of it all. So I would play it periodically here and there. I also remember before I got into really, really into gaming, I was always into games for a while, junior high and middle school. That was my big Final Fantasy years. I played Final Fantasy 7, 8, and 9 then. Those were my core memories of that. And then when I got to high school, it's not that I dropped games for a reason. It definitely wasn't because I suddenly wanted to date girls or something, because I had no luck. I have no Riz, as the kids call it. I got none of that shit. So but I do remember my first girlfriend in my senior year, she knew I was into games, and so they had a Super Nintendo and Donkey Kong Country down in their basement that we would play every now and then.
That's cool.
So that's kind of like my earliest memories with it. Then once I got into retro game, just gaming in general, gaming is more than just playing the new releases, but started to enjoy. When I started to enjoy looking back on games history and everything like that, that's when I really kind of sunk my teeth into collecting, and then in turn the Super Nintendo, and now it's one of my favorite systems. And something we should have probably shouted out, at least for you, Dan, you worked on a Super Nintendo book.
Yeah, so I work with Pat Contry on the Ultimate Nintendo series of books. Now that it's been announced, the expanded edition of the NES one is my current focus. But I was brought on, probably a decade ago to work on the Ultimate Guide to the SNES library, 91 to 98. So I was a writer and technical assistant in that, then jumped on to do kind of a little of everything for the N64 book, which just recently came out. And now we're kind of heads down finishing the remake of the NES one. But yeah, that was I didn't mention it. That was kind of my third revival with the SNES. The first was growing up with it. And then I kind of, as I got into my late teens, kind of phased out of playing retro games for a while, as I started doing mostly PC gaming, and then was too busy to do much gaming as I started college. Yeah. And then kind of got back into the retro game stuff incidentally when I accidentally started doing YouTube stuff, because I thought I could get college credit for making videos. for my students as a graduate teaching assistant. And they were like, no, you can't. My friends are like, well, let's just do Let's Plays. And so then all of a sudden I'm doing that, going to conventions. They're like, I miss the SNES, so I should play that. Pat's like, you want to play the SNES? You can write for me. Uh-oh. And then I'm back in. Now I'm playing it again more than I play stuff that comes out these days.
Nice.
And Nadia, like reason I reached out to you, believe it or not, like this is going to be super tangential, but I know you've obviously written a ton about Super Nintendo in various ways, whether it's directly about the console or about the games. But I literally was just like, well, who do I know that's into like Super Nintendo stuff? And then my first thought was like, who likes Mega Man X? And I was like, oh, Nadia would like Mega Man X. She'd like the Super Nintendo. You
I hate that garbage.
Couldn't be. But yeah, so let's go into talking about the system now. Let's kind of go into a bit of the background and like talking about the world the Super Nintendo released into. You know, it came out originally in 1990 on, according to Wikipedia, November 21st, 1990 in Japan, and it came out on August 23rd, 1991 in North America. And obviously those dates are a little bit all over the place because some, you know, street date was more of a suggestion more than a hard line.
Back then. It was just like I got Chrono Trigger when the guy who usually got my games was like, yeah, I'm going down to the airport now to pick it up. You can come over later to get it.
Just it sounds like you picked up Chrono Trigger out of like a trunk.
No, he took it back to his store and I picked it up.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, it kind of felt like that back in the olden days.
That's funny. And I did a little bit of research on it. Now, I was watching a YouTube video, and just to kind of get a starting off point. And I will shout out the YouTube video at the very least, so that way I'm not just like naming it without actually giving it credit. Let's see if I can find it again. But it was from Retro Break, the YouTube channel Retro Break, who did a video on the development and launch of the Super Nintendo. And something like, I don't know if I necessarily agree with this, but I did find the corroborating evidence to back this up. So one of the things he talked about on it was that during the Famicom era, Hudson Soft, the first third-party developer for the Famicom, came to them with an add-on. They pitched an add-on to Nintendo to play their little B cards, which is kind of like what would end up like basically like cue cards type of thing.
Yeah,
or cue cards.
Like the little Hudson Soft little.
Yes,
I know what you mean. They're cute.
And Nintendo turned it down. That eventually would turn into the Famicom Disk System. Like this kind of idea kind of stuck with Nintendo. It was just, they turned it down due to like cost things and all those other. I don't know all the specifics as to why, but eventually the Famicom Disk System did exist. Kind of like, I don't know if it was inspired by it, but it seems like one thing led to another. Mm-hmm. However, since they got turned down from this by Nintendo, they went somewhere else, and they went to NEC. And that eventually, that partnership eventually became the TurboGrafx. And so you have the TurboGrafx 16, or the PC Engine, coming out, I want to say, 87, I believe.
Yeah.
And that kind of puts the screws to Nintendo a little bit, whose the Famicom / NES was much more underpowered compared to the PC Engine.
The PC Engine got some good traction, especially versus the TurboGrafx here, which didn't really make a huge impression except on Pat Contry, I think. Sorry.
And it's funny. This is one of those moments where I feel like Nintendo may have accidentally bailed themselves out a little bit, because if you look at the games that were coming out, the early NES games, 85, 86, 87, with a couple of exceptions, like it really is like good solid arcade ports or games that have that same aesthetic. And if not for the custom Rico chipset and the ability to do mappers and how clever the expansion capabilities of the NES cartridge are, Nintendo could have been in serious trouble from NEC at that point. But they had kind of built in a backstop there, which then you look at the stuff that comes out to the NES in like the late 90s or the late 80s and the early 90s. And it's amazing that system was able to trudge as strong as it did.
I still even think about, we were talking about our mutual friend Dan, Game Dave, off mic. He did that whole series, Famicorner, where he did he showed some he would focus on Famicom games like Japan
I
exclusive.
adore Famicorner.
It's a great fucking name. That is a great name.
That is
for
a great name.
series.
I still get compliments for my Famicorner shirt when I go out.
I have one
cool.
too. It's a great design. He did an episode though on he did a video on Joy Mech Fight, and that was a super late Famicom game, and the visuals on that, like, it just what kind of in line with what you're saying, Dan, about how like it's crazy the life cycle of the NES/Famicom when you can look at that game and see, like, it came out, I think it was like 95 was when it came out or something like that. It was like mid 90s, which is super late for a Famicom game.
It could be a little confusing to own an NES like when you were in North America, because there was such a disparity between those early black box games and like later games, especially over here, like Mega Man 4 and 5 look fantastic. And we didn't really have that long history of the Famicom the way Japan did. Like Japan, yeah, they had that Famicom disk system. They had that like really clumsy era where everything kind of sucked, and like Nintendo, the biggest game that you could do at one time was Super Mario Brothers before it had to switch to the disc system, and disc system was just never a thing here.
And it's kind of interesting to think about how, like, we kind of, since we didn't get the NES till 85 ish, depending on how you look at the release date, it, like, we missed 2 years of all that sludge, as we were talking about, like all the growing pains that Nintendo had to go through. And so, the TurboGrafx comes out in 87, excuse me. And then the Sega Genesis / Mega Drive comes out, I believe, in 88, or is it 89? I'm liking on that. Because it's like, it's always a little bit different for the Japanese versus North America. 88 in Japan, 89 in North America. So if you look at that, it came out 2 years prior to the Super Famicom. So you have these two next-gen systems 2+ years on the market before Nintendo even jumps in. So the reason why... I don't know if there's ever been a proven direct causation, but when Hudson and NEC had the PC Engine / TurboGrafx coming out on its release date, which was 9/7/1987, and once again, according to Wikipedia, Nintendo announced the Super Famicom. No, sorry. A month before the PC Engine launched in Japan, which would have been in October of 87, excuse me, on September 7th, 1987, Nintendo announced the Super Famicom. So it is a little bit of conjecture, but it is kind of odd timing that before their first third-party developer kind of somewhat betrays them and goes with a rival company to create a rival system. And a month before that rival system comes out, you announced your successor system. Like, it would definitely feels like Nintendo is trying to kind of take the wind out of their sails a bit.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, in a lot of ways, it kind of echoes, of course, the Super Nintendo PlayStation.
Yeah.
And what went on there. And Japanese business can be very cutthroat in that regard. Just you do this, I'll do this, and no one's going to say anything out loud, of course, but they'll find ways to make their displeasure known.
And that's what it kind of seems like with what this was. It feels like the TurboGrafx is kind of what pushed Nintendo to be like, okay, we really have to like develop this system. I feel like the system would have come out eventually, regardless of the TurboGrafx existing or otherwise. Like, I don't think that would have changed the fact that there would have been a successor to the Famicom.
Sure. But it lit a fire under their butt. Yeah,
it definitely seemed like that competition, whether it made them move faster or made them put more quality into it, we obviously will never know. It's just how it played out. But I'd like to think, my conjecture, my theory is that it put, like you said, Nadia, lit a fire under their butt and made them kind of work harder, either for timetable wise or just, once again, quality wise.
Yeah.
Also, something that's interesting to think about, like the world in which the Super Nintendo is coming out into. If you really think about it, successor consoles really were not. The next gen consoles of a successful system were not guaranteed to succeed at the time.
Of course. Yeah.
The Genesis technically would have become that, but it really wasn't that in 1990. It was successful enough. I'm not saying it was like, like failing, but it didn't have Sonic yet. Sonic was in 91.
No. It was kind of known to be like definitely a system for cooler older kids because he had like Altered Beast and oh my god, blood, and oh my god, arcade graphics. But one thing I didn't realize until much later is that the Genesis, for as much of a competition as it was for the Super Nintendo up here, Japan, it just not to say it was a failure, but just did not make much of a showing next to SNES and the PC Engine.
I mean, it I think this era is so interesting too because now when a console comes out, it's generally like whatever console is winning the console wars currently, it usually is winning the console wars in all regions for the most part.
Yeah.
But back then, look at this very specific slice of game history. TurboGrafx was doing really well in Japan, did fuck all here in North America.
I knew one kid with one. He was the weird kid. There was the Sega kids, there was a Nintendo kids, and there was always that one like TurboGrafx kid.
I wish I knew that too. I had a Sega kid who was my next door neighbor. Then my other next neighbor, like 2 houses down, had a PlayStation. I had a PS1, and I would play both of those a lot. But believe it or not, there was no Nintendo kid on my block, which is just That's strange.
That is strange.
Yeah. Very, very odd.
You survived, though. You survived.
I did, and then I ended up getting my first console was an N64, so I became that Nintendo kid.
Interesting Nintendo console to start with.
I remember I've told the story before, but I begged my parents for a Sega Genesis because that's what my neighbors had, and I loved the games they had. And then for Christmas, I want to say it was 1999 is when I got my first console. My parents also, I grew up evangelical, so they were a little slow with the getting into this type of stuff.
Right.
So I got my first console in 1999. I was asking for a Genesis, got the N64, and it was pissed. I was like, this isn't a Genesis. I was so, what are you doing? And then I ended up falling in love with the N64, and now it's one of my favorite systems. But but when I first got it, I was like, well, where's Tiny Toon Adventures Buster's Hidden Treasure? This is that was like my favorite game of all time.
That's so cute.
I did a whole episode on it with Gabe Soares. Shout out to my buddy Gabe.
I love the NES game, the original one. That was a favorite of mine.
Was it Buster Busts Loose?
No, it was just Tiny Toon Adventures by Konami. It was like a Super Mario 3 clone, and it was just really well done.
So like, I just want to kind of get both of your thoughts on like, do you think it was how much of a risk was it for Nintendo with the Super Nintendo? Like, I feel like it's simultaneously like, considering when it came out, it was simultaneously like this should be a surefire hit, but also at the same time, almost every bit of evidence leading up to it would have said this would not have worked. Look, i.e. Atari. Every time Atari tried to do any successor system, whether it was the 5200 or the 7800, it just did not work. I don't know. Do either of you have any thoughts on any of this, though? Dan, I'll start off with you if you have anything.
A couple. So the Super Famicom sits in kind of this interesting time window where they didn't have the market penetration, but the Mega Drive / Genesis had come out a year prior. It's in 89. And it's kind of this, not really, but like at the time, it's kind of a hardware juggernaut. It's got the Motorola 68,000 chip in it. It's using a Zilog Z80 for the audio. So you can like get this combination FM synth thing out of it. It's got like some really impressive architecture in there for a system. As you mentioned, NEC has already been out as well. And I don't know if you have ever played any games on the Apple II GS.
Yep.
But if correct me if I'm wrong here, I think it's the only other system that uses the same Ricoh chip that the SNES uses.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And so they share. It's kind of funny. You can compare the libraries and the game styles of the two, and it really shows how much knowledge and skill and development went into Super Nintendo game creation. Because when it comes to the hardware in that system, it's kind of funky. It's got 2 PPUs that handle visual processing. One of them is more like sprite creation. One of them is more doing effects and filters over that. The Ricoh chip that is in there It's basically like the beefed up version of the 6502 that they had in the old system. So you're still working with the same, 16-bit instruction set, which means like some of the institutional knowledge for people that were developing NES games carries over a little bit to some of the SNES development, which I think helped them in the long run. But it's got problems with variable clock speed based on whether certain buses are being accessed. It's got an 8-bit sound channel system, but it's all samples, so it's completely different from something like an FM synth where you're playing instruments versus the audio quality of any given game can be very dependent on like the samples that your audio team created and like built to then be addressed and tracked, so it's kind of this really wonky, beautiful, potential, weird shaped canvas thing going on with the SNES. So it was very easy for this to fail, but I think by the same token, Nintendo had done such, and it just speaks to how impressive the NES is. They had done such a good job becoming the market for games, especially in North America. Nintendo, I think at one point had like 89% of the US console market. It was absurd. Mm-hmm. So if you remember a lot of the coverage back then, the videos, like your local news would be like, the new Nintendo is coming out. You need to get the new Nintendo. And it was all kids screaming for it, followed by one or two parents going, I don't understand why the old Nintendo games won't work on the new Nintendo.
Yeah,
and that seems like a ripoff to me, but they're still in line at Montgomery Ward buying one, and so I think the market was so shaped for them to step in and do it, that they didn't need to knock it out of the park. It didn't need to be perfect. It needed to be good enough. And if it had been good enough, it would have been a competitor to Sega, and the two of them probably still would have been in a butting heads console war thing for years the way they were. But they also had some things just kind of fall into place for them, and it did work out wonderfully. And I think if you ask a fan of the console, a lot of that boils down to the ability to do things with the system, that it has some unique potential and some unique things, either in the API or in some of the display modes, that allow you to do some pretty beautiful and remarkable things that really made it stand out from the NES, that you could show like your parent immediately, like something like F-Zero and sure, it had the same perspective as earlier racing games like Outrun, where, you were like Horizon Racing. Yeah. But you could immediately tell that this was something different, the way that the rotation and transform was happening on the screen, and the way that the track was spinning around with you as you're speeding through it. Yeah. That there was something special about the way that hardware could be used. And both F-Zero and Pilot Wings were such good tech demos for the system that when it launched, you could immediately tell the difference. And that made it kind of a must-own.
Yeah. As someone who doesn't know a whole lot about how the SNES hardware compared to consoles of the day, I would assume that this is just Nintendo being Nintendo, because it could have like just copied the Genesis, maybe make it a little bit beefier. But the SNES is a very different animal from the Genesis, and you really kind of get that impression when you look at, say, ports of popular games like Earthworm Jim being a great example. Some people swear by the Genesis version, which had an extra level. And of course, Genesis games tended to have larger resolution, was it? I don't know what the resolution sizes were compared to each other, but Nintendo, at the end of the day, being Nintendo, like, they're going to do whatever makes them stand out. For example, as you said, like, there was nothing that looked like Mode 7 back in the day. Genesis sure didn't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, the Genesis was higher res. It was like 322. God, I don't think it was 256. Maybe 224. And the SNES, I know, was only 256 pixels wide, because that was a thing we had to look into for the. We were doing the screenshots for the SNES book.
Why would they make that like a smaller resolution, though? Do you know? Was there a reason?
Some of it is hardware limitations. Some of it is the graphical effects, so like having that scaler. And some of it, I think, is just, again, because they had this very weird 2 PPU setup, that it was syncing things. And I mean, they were all on CRTs. They all had overscan and things. You didn't have pictures as precise as we do today. The way stuff's displayed.
That's true.
But it did have to, it created a bit of a constraint. And it's funny, you think about like, wow, like 256 and 320 is like, it's pretty radical difference for two just things that are both on a 4:3 like TV display. You'd imagine like, is all that extra Genesis stuff getting lost on the sides? And it's not. It was there. It was just more condensed. So it even in some games creates this like, do things look more or less like you're almost looking at different pixel like shapes. The SNES didn't have like perfectly square pixels. It had ones that were just a little bit fatter because it was going across the same horizontal range. So it's if I think the Nintendo Switch Online lets you choose between 4:3 and pixel perfect.
Yeah.
Right. And so that the difference there is that the pixels aren't perfectly square. That the SNES pixels were just a tiny bit wider than they were tall.
Interesting. And actually, you know what? In thinking of the resolution thing, so mode 7 is obviously the most well-known mode on the Super Nintendo. Yeah. I would argue mode 7 is the blast processing of the Super Nintendo.
It's such a good marketing tool. It's amazing.
It is.
There is also modes 5 and 6, though. Something I learned about somewhat more recently, literally in the last couple of days in doing research for this.
Oh no, I know why, and I'm so sad now, but I know why.
Oh, I mean, I don't know why I learned. I just looked it up, so I'm confused. I'm confused why you're feeling sad.
You go ahead. It's fine.
Basically, it would allow at least mode 5 is it's a high res background mode, so like you could actually run the games in higher resolution, but when doing so, it would limit you in other ways. I believe it limited your color palette for the most part.
It also, you can constrain it with interlacing, and the tiles have to be rendered in larger chunks because you have less addressing for them. But the reason I mention is one of my favorite games growing up was RPM Racing, Radical Psycho Machine Racing, which is the pre-rock and roll racing game. It was not a great game, but it is unique in that it is, might be one of the only games to leverage mode 5. They did it so that they could do like the widescreen 2-player or 1-player and then like the camera on the bottom for RPM racing. But that game was it was the Blizzard, because it was Silicon and Synapse, so it's like the Blizzard founders, Mike Morhaime and those guys. George Sanger doing the soundtrack for it, and the late Rebecca Heineman was the programmer for that, and she was the one who was able to get it running, and because it's a port of an older game, and even getting it to run in the SNES was kind of tricky, and she was unbelievably good at porting games.
She was a porting genius.
She really was.
I just recently wrote about Out of This World for the Super Nintendo, which is an incredible port. And I mean, it's the port that most people, or at least console people like myself, are most comfortable with. That's what I was introduced to the game through. When I played it on the Amiga, I'm like, wait, this isn't right. Where's the music?
Yeah, so when I think of like mode 5, it's one of those things where I'm like, I think of RPM Racing because it was like, they found a way to use like something that very few other developers were like, well, what are we going to do with that? We don't really have any use for this.
Yeah.
Neat. And so other than like mode 0, where like if you wanted to do certain effects to have things like sliding behind and in front of each other to give like a weird UI effect, if you don't mind like a low color version of something. Very few developers leveraged it. It was like, oh wow, like we have mode 7, like that's fun. Let's do all sorts of cool things with that. Let's bust out the matrix math and get some things twisting all over the place. It's neat to see like there was a development team that could pick a lesser used SNES display mode and make something special out of it.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Rest in peace, Rebecca Heineman. God damn, that's wild.
For sure.
Yeah, and it's we are recording this only literally a week actually since her passing, I believe. It's been a week, which is just, it's crazy. And for those who don't know who Rebecca Heineman is, I mean, if you've not been online in the gaming space, like that's surprising you haven't heard of her, but go look her up. She was a legend. Crazy. Just I'm at a loss for words. I want to do actually like a tribute like bonus episode on my Patreon at some point, kind of like talking about her life. But yeah, she was amazing. She just passed away a week ago. It sucks.
Yeah.
Fuck cancer. There we go. So yeah, modes. in speaking of the modes though, like mode 7 was obviously a huge selling point, like we've said already. You know, you saw it in so many different places in Super Castlevania 4 with like the rotating room or the the cylinder, in almost every JRPG with a world map.
Yes.
Final,
Airship time.
Yep. Whee! So freaking cool. There was that also. You touched on it before, Dan, in terms of the sound. The sound chip was actually developed by Ken Kutaragi from Sony.
Yeah.
You know, previously he eventually would become the head of PlayStation, but this was before that PlayStation. Obviously, he was working on the chip unbeknownst to the higher ups at Sony, and he got in trouble for it. He was almost going to be fired, but then Sony president Norio Oga stepped in and approved the project, and then obviously things went on from there. But you can thank the Super Nintendo for a myriad of reasons for the PlayStation.
Yeah, basically.
The whole subsystem's kind of cool. It's a Sony CPU. It's got its own RAM bank and like its own signal processor, and it's almost like this little separate part of the system. It reminds me a bit of like the Paula chip from the Amiga, the original chipset, in the way that it's kind of segmented the audio hardware in a little way, and you can just do some really beautiful things. Like ask anybody who remembers Super Nintendo games, and soundtracks are instantly high up on their mind. And I think that has so much to do with it.
Such a great example, for example.
There was something I saw, it was probably at least a year or two ago. Someone was able to, I don't know if it was through I think they reverse engineered it somehow. They took the samples from maybe Zelda or Final Fantasy on the Super Nintendo, and they were able to, I think it was pre generative AI, so I don't know, or maybe I'm not sure. I don't want to speak too much on something I can't quite remember, but they were able to reverse engineer the original audio from the samples.
Nice.
And so you could actually hear what, as close as possible. I don't know if it was an approximation or if it was legitimately this is what it was, but you could hear the original sample, the original recordings before it got compressed to hell and back for the Super Nintendo.
Right.
That's awesome.
Yeah, super, super cool. Moving on to the console's life cycle itself, the big storyline throughout the Super Nintendo's life cycle was the console wars. This was the console war up until, I would say, I can't even think of the next big one. I would say maybe the PS2, GameCube, Xbox era. I know N64 and PlayStation technically had it, but I feel like this one, the Mega Drive / Genesis versus the Super Nintendo, sticks in most people's minds. Would you guys agree with me?
I know I would. I don't know about you, Nadia.
Yeah. I would say so, at least. As I said before, from a North American standpoint, it was quite different in Japan. And also, one thing I was surprised to learn later on is that Japan was not happy with the way Sega was just kind of talking shit about Nintendo in America. It wasn't the way they do things
American.
over there.
Just being obnoxiously
being very loudly American.
I think one of the things to note is just how competitive and how close it was for years, in a way that neither side, I think, really, especially in the North American market, had an idea how this was going to, where was the dust going to settle when this was done. In a way that we can look back on other generations and other consoles, and it's oh wow, the PS2 just kind of eventually exploded and took over everything for its era. Good on them for being the cheapest DVD player on the market. It's amazing how for most of these, when you're really into gaming and you play a lot of stuff or you own multiple consoles, it's very easy to lose the forest for the trees.
Yes.
In a way that when you step back and take a much simpler look at it, it's way clearer for the most part to tell oh, this company was clearly dominating this era. Or this company was clearly dominating this era. And it's almost magical in a weird way to look at the early 90s when Nintendo had just basically in the late 80s completely cornered the North American console market. And then the Sega Genesis kind of has this upstart moment where it looks for a couple of years like it does. And then the Super Nintendo comes out and has an install base. And now all of a sudden you've got these two 16-bit consoles locked in. And I'm sure it was as much fun for the journalists and the people around gaming to be oh, this is going to be good. Now we can really sink our teeth in this because you've got competition.
Yeah.
And I mean true, honest to God competition between two juggernauts who are, now we can compare, is this game better on Genesis or SNES? Is, you know, like the old me, like, oh, you got to get the sports games for Genesis, so you got to get the RPGs for Super Nintendo. It's like, do you need to own both consoles? Like now all of a sudden it really matured the conversation and simultaneously immatured the conversation because you had this like goofy quasi sibling rivalry or friends of friends rivalry. Like, which table are you sitting at?
Frenemies.
Right. In a way that I don't know has been replicated.
It really hasn't. And that's what kind of drives me crazy about writing about games in the modern era, is that you have like people who will, you know, kids are like, oh, you're just a Xbot, oh, you're a Sony pony. It's like, you kids don't even know what console wars are. Like, these, can I swear on this podcast?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, like if you go to like an award show nowadays, like Sony, Microsoft, everyone, they just kind of get on the table, they get on the stage and jerk each other off. It's not like it was like back in the day when it was like, you know, the Super Nintendo doesn't have blast processing, Sega Genesis does, and then like, oh, we're going to talk shit about Mario Kart, the most popular franchise to ever exist.
And it just also
not then.
And also it's like, if you look at even the games that were coming out on the consoles for the Genesis and Super Nintendo, like, you know, you look at what's happening now, you have Nintendo doing its own thing. You have Sony really still buying into with its exclusives, but because they're quadrupling down on quadruple A games, you don't get as many exclusives as you used to, and the crunch is fucking abysmal. So like you have like less of these games that you bought the PlayStation for, not the number 4, but FOR. You have less of these games that you bought the PS5 for than you had in previous generations, and then you have Xbox doing God knows what it's doing. You know, it's its own thing. And I will say, at least right now, each system's ecosystem is so distinct, but they still don't feel like they're actually competing with each other. Like Microsoft is going in on services, PlayStation's going on exclusives, and Nintendo is going in on Nintendo, like the brand that it's built up over the last 40 plus years.
Which is its biggest strength, arguably.
Exactly. But then you go back to this, and you have basically two console juggernauts. And once again, this is a very North American perspective, and it is kind of interesting to see how it kind of works out, because like, you know, Sega was really big over in Europe and PAL, and then as it gets kind of if you go west towards the United States, then you have the mixture of Japan, and you have, you know, Sega and Super Nintendo kind of equal, and then you go farther, you keep going west now towards Japan, and now Nintendo's winning. So it almost feels like this gradient of popularity from one side of it, one side of the world to the next. But in any case, if you look at what was coming out in North America, Nintendo was focused on the home console experience. Like that's why there's more RPGs on the Super Nintendo. That's why there's games designed for the living room experience. And Sega was focused on action and arcade, bringing the arcade experience home. And I think Jeremy on Retronauts has talked about this a lot on a lot of his like Sega retrospectives. And you can see it, like, it's not just the exclusives, it's even how they handle like the game, like the same game on the different systems. There's a whole YouTube channel called Console Wars. It has like 70,000 subscribers, where they do like, they'll look at two games on the Super Nintendo and Genesis, and they compare them. It's a cool idea. It's a great idea, because there was a lot of, you know, back and forth. In fact, one of the most notable ones was one of the reasons why the Super Nintendo initially wasn't doing as well. It was Mortal Kombat. You know, they didn't want blood in it, and Mortal Kombat on the Genesis did have blood in it, and it destroyed them. The Genesis Mega Drive version outsold the Super Nintendo version. But then once the ESRB was created, they brought it, and Mortal Kombat 2 came out, they put the blood back in, and Super Nintendo mopped the floor with the Genesis.
Yeah, that was pretty much the end of the Genesis in a way.
Let me say, I love this topic, partially because my wife now works for the ESA.
Oh, really?
Oh,
yeah,
cool.
She now, and we got a copy of the pre-ESRB Night Trap, just to have in her office, just for the comedy factor of it all.
Nice.
But yeah, also because I live in DC and grew up in this area, and so the Cole Lieberman hearings were my first Oh, cool. Like I'm 9 or 10. Yeah, I guess I would have been 10. I don't know. Like I'm young. I'm sitting there. I'm watching C-SPAN. Right. And let me tell you how a parent reacts when they walk into the room and they're not yet a preteen kid is watching C-SPAN. I'm amazed they didn't faint.
That's so
no,
funny.
this is important. I need to see how it ends.
Who's gonna win? Sony
Who's
or
gonna win the
Nintendo?
console wars?
Wow, Byron Dorgan's really mad, Mom.
Who? So confused. That's so funny, dude. But no, like with the console war, like I think what's in a weird sense, it's almost frustrating when you do an episode, and this was in vice versa for both. If you do an episode or have a conversation about the Super Nintendo or Genesis, you have to bring up this back and forth that was consistently going. Like you have to almost talk equal parts about the Genesis and Super Nintendo when you're doing that, because like they both had such a large market share and they both went at each other so much so by the end of the Super Nintendo's life cycle, they tried to take a page out of Sega's marketing book, marketing tools, and it bombed. It did not, like, i.e. Earthbound's
Right, the
marketing.
butthole surfers.
The what? Sorry.
Are you talking about when they tried to do the marketing and they did the cool commercials with the butthole surfers on it?
Or is this just like the Play It Loud campaign in general?
The Play It Loud campaign, yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Play It Loud.
I actually, when I was still working for US Gamer, when it still existed, we had our copy editor, Katie McCarthy, much younger than me, but an extremely good editor. And she didn't know about that campaign. I wrote an article about it, sent it to her to edit, and she lost her mind. She thought it was so funny. We had this campaign that Nintendo trying to be really cool with the butthole surfers. She's like, I forgot they even existed.
That should have been my tagline for the episode. Nintendo, bring back the butthole surfers. Do it. You won't. No buttons. Yeah, it just, but like the console wars was just such a major part of it, and like you were saying before, Nadia, like just there hasn't really been another console war like this. It just, everything about it, like just so much, like it was interesting because I mean, I was a little bit too young to see it from like a playground perspective, but at least from like when you look at it from a the marketing and business side, it was just like they were just aggressive, just flat out aggressive. Nintendo had no idea what to do with that level of aggressiveness until they tried their own hand with it, and just like I said, failed. Like the marketing for Earthbound, this game stinks. I'm like, who? Like,
it's a bit of a travesty.
Mm-hmm.
The best part just to watch the Nintendo Power is the slow, weird shift where like the style of like classified information and Pack Watch and all the different segments they had in Nintendo Power magazine, like how it slowly tonally clashed with their own marketing.
Yeah.
With the Play It Loud campaign stuff. And it was this, because Nintendo Power is such this, innocent marketing tool / necessary guide that like we all subscribed to because it was amazing and it helped translate so many otherwise confusing NES titles into like understandable and completable things, that all of a sudden it's like it was the tonal shift of the marketing there was just an absolute head whip.
Yeah.
And I think what really swung the console wars, though, like, we've been kind of talking about back and forth, like what Sega and Nintendo were doing to each other, but really what swung the console wars, and I'm ripping this point off directly from Retronauts, so I apologize in advance, Nadia. Well, I guess not in advance right now, but 1994, the year 1994 was a game changer for the Super Nintendo, and yes. I am parroting a point from Retronauts, so yes, I'm not getting this directly from something of my own observations, but if you look at the games that came out in 1994, Super Metroid, dear Lord, Final Fantasy VI, dear Lord, also Mega Man X, dear Lord, Mortal Kombat 2, the one we were talking about before, dear Lord. The big one though was Donkey Kong Country. Donkey Kong Country was monumental. It was,
yeah.
I mean, it was, the marketing was everywhere. It made the system look like you could do so, like, all it really is just sprites. It's really not doing anything incredibly technically impressive, but because the art design, because all the sprites were made and the art direction was done using pre-rendered 3D tools, it looked leaps and bounds better than anything the Genesis had put out. It was because 94 was also, I think, was 94 the year PlayStation came out in Japan?
Yes, December 94.
Yeah. So it put something on par with like, it made the Nintendo, the gap between the PS1 and the Super Nintendo appear a lot smaller.
It did,
than what it actually was. I also included on this list of games here Illusion of Gaia, just because that's a fun game, and just for you, Nadia, Mega Man Soccer. That obviously moved the needle.
Oh, of course. Thank you for that.
What are your both thoughts on 1994, though? Anything you would like to talk about the games that came out that year? Nadia, I'll start off with you, since I started off with Dan at a different spot beforehand. Thoughts on gaming in 1994?
Well, first I have to do an actually and say that I think Mega Man X was 93.
Oh, okay. Am I looking at the North American date, or maybe I'm wrong? I'll look it up.
But either way, like 94 was an incredible year. That was, as you said, the year that Final Fantasy VI came out, and gosh, that just not just elevated what the SNES could do, but what games could do, what RPGs could do.
I think Mega Man X was... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, especially in terms of like a storytelling medium, but Donkey Kong Country had that wow factor, and I mean, it's a great game. I still really enjoy DK Country. I love Donkey Kong Country too. I think that's one of my favorite platformers, and that took Donkey Kong Country, which already looked really good, and just really elevated it to something else. Some of those backgrounds in that game still impress me. Like, of course, they're kind of blurry by today's standards, but the art design, like you could see what they were doing with it, and it's just some. Like, I still love when you go to the amusement park and you ride on the stupid little skull coasters, and when you're going down the hill, like Diddy raises his arms. Just, it's full of little surprises like that. So, Nintendo's ad campaign at the time, I think they finally, maybe they killed the Butthole Surfers, I don't know, but they switched over to who needs a new system, and that's what they kind of ran, especially as the N64 was delayed time and time again. And I remember, I think it was, because I was reading a bunch of game magazines by this point. I think it was Game Fan. No, not Game Fan. It was Game Players, where someone wrote in, they're really pissed off about Nintendo delaying the N64. And they said, quote, "Who needs a new system? Nintendo does, more than anybody." And I just like that a lot.
People were still mad about, people still shit-talking console manufacturers even back in the 90s.
Oh, God, yeah.
Yeah.
As close directly to the face as possible.
And I'm going to say I think you're okay to call Mega Man X 94. If I understand, it was December 93 for the Super Famicom, but January 94 for the Super Nintendo. So,
yeah.
Gotcha.
For the North America, I think it was a 94 game.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, that's fine. Good stuff. It was a good year. I think you're right. Okay, because yes, I played it in 94. Sorry. And
well, no, you were still right though. It's a 93 date.
I had to look at a certain SNES guidebook.
I don't know anyone who wrote any guidebooks in this house.
That's funny. But you're 100% right, Nadia. Like Donkey Kong Country, like I don't think you can understate how much it just completely shook up the landscape at the time. Like it just that, and I covered it on the show. Every year I do a backlog month where I put 16 games up on my Patreon and have my patrons vote on as many of them as they want, and the top 4 are games that all of them are games from my backlog, but the top 4 that get voted on, that get votes for, I cover in October later that year. And Donkey Kong Country wasn't this year, it was last year's, because I had never beaten it all the way through. It's been on my backlog for years, and man, that game still is fantastic. Like, I know some people aren't a fan of like the platforming of it. I still think it rules. I loved that game.
I do. Yeah, I love it.
To me, Donkey Kong Country is something that shows off simultaneously the capabilities of the system and what people who really know how to develop for it can do, because the skill level at Rare was absurd. Like you look at the different layers of parallax in the game, and it's all these beautiful, like taking a 3D asset and getting it into the SNES is not super hard. Like we had Balls 3D, like we can do this in a way that is like not as good, or we can, but then that level also, like I think the first or second song in the game has multiple movements.
Jungle Japes, or whatever it's called.
Jungle Hijinks is like a 2 movement song, and it's like the first or second one in the game. there's a transition, like a weather transition or a day to night transition, like again, really early in the first few levels.
Yeah, there's a day to night transition, and then you play the night level that has rain in it, and it's just a really impressive looking game.
And in just a couple of levels, they've just completely blown away your expectations for a platformer, and that's before you listen to Aquatic Ambience and just break down in tears.
Yeah.
Was it The Onion, and I think it was, who had like a article that was like, man attempts to write song about monkey writing swordfish, accidentally produces transcendent piece of audio or something.
That's pretty good. I haven't seen
but
that.
Yeah, like not just the audiovisual quality, but like the way it's mastered and kind of comes together. There are very few games that have that level of kind of that marriage of function and form and kind of come together to create this thing. And I think one of the things that makes the Super Nintendo unique is just how weirdly frequent it happened for that system.
Mm-hmm. It did, didn't it?
For so many different genres of game. You mentioned Super Metroid and just what a lonely and beautiful, complex action adventure that is. How A Link to the Past, innovates on the previous two titles for the NES.
A Link to the Past, even that rainstorm that starts with, it's still one of my favorite openings to a game. It still has like that real, it feels like a real thunderstorm. And seeing that for the first time was,
and it's early games for the system, it's late games for the system.
Yes.
Year by year, there are consistently, every year, there are a couple of games that you could say for the holidays, like, if you get, you ask for these, if you get them added to your collection on your birthday, on Christmas, like if you've got, that rich uncle who feels guilty and buys you stuff all the time, whatever it is, like, there's just consistently like these beautiful 5-star, like gold standard games that the system had every year to highlight and to showcase. And it was first party, it was third party. And it certainly wasn't every game, right? Like the system had, was it 700-ish titles plus obviously another
730 something or something like that.
Another duplicate that again over in Japan, and it's closer to to 1400. So obviously not everything reaches that, but there's always stuff out there that it's new, exciting, and is just the peak of what was being made at the time.
For sure.
And like even just look at 1994, like you mentioned Super Metroid, but just look at the sound, like the whether it's the visuals or the music between Super Metroid, Final Fantasy VI, and Mega Man X, all three incredibly different style games.
Sure.
Super Metroid, the super lonely, atmospheric, kind of horror-ish. Final Fantasy, the sweeping orchestral scores and the the epic narrative. And then you have Mega Man X, which is like an action movie, right? It's like you got butt rock blaring for the butthole surfers, and it's a grand old time.
I think it was actually in the Play It Loud commercial, like they showed it off, which I would too. It's a good ass game.
And I thought you were talking about the butthole surfers. They were showing off the butthole surfers on the play. I'm like, okay, you do you, Nintendo.
And you even mentioned Final Fantasy 3/6, right? My thesis game. I will always have a soft spot in my heart for it, but even that had the incredibly awkward commercial with Mog, like as a casting director, calling different bosses into the room. Like, no, next.
I had never seen that until I got the internet. I don't think Canada got a lot of game commercials because I don't think people wanted to spend money on Canada as a market. I will say, however, we did get hockey commercials that my American husband had never seen. Like we had a hockey commercial for NHL 94, I think it was, which was on the Genesis. And that had like Ty Domi being the shit out of some guy.
Now, is he just doing that for the love of the game, or was he paid to do these commercials? I mean, Ty Domi would probably
he'd probably beat the shit out of somebody just because he likes to.
The commercials I remembered, it was like, oh, look at, of course it was Sega, so it's like, look at this intense, cool action NHL 94 hockey, because I had it in French, and I think the tagline was like, next to us, other hockey games are more like figure skating. And of course, since it was like, the 90s, like gay people are funny. So everyone's like kind of skating and, doing like stunts. And then someone like does a jump and lands in Ty Domi's arms, and he just growls at him and beats the shit out of him.
That's awful.
It was pretty good.
Ty Domi is a crazy man. I think his son Max is still playing for the Maple Leafs right now. Max Domi.
Probably.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. So I want to move on, though. We've been talking about the system's life cycle, just some of the stuff going on throughout its life, and some of the other things throughout its life that we have not touched on are its peripherals and add-ons and other random things that they did with this system outside of just releasing some fucking great games. We have there's so many. I have a list here. I'm going to just kind of read them off, and I'm going to throw it over to both of you just to kind of touch on whichever ones like pique your interest. Feel free to, we could talk about all of them if you want to, but the ones I have listed here are the Super Game Boy, the Super Nintendo Mouse, the Super Scope, Satellaview, which only came out in Japan for the Super Famicom, the Super FX chip, which was, it's not, I mean, I guess that's an add-on to a cartridge.
Yeah.
Then obviously the Super Nintendo PlayStation, which is its own thing. We'll touch on that at the very end, I would say. And then the Nintendo Power, which you were talking to us a bit off mic, Dan.
Oh yeah, I can mention that real quick. The Nintendo Power was, we always think of it as a magazine, right? But in Japan, Nintendo Power was also like this service, and you could go and get a flash cart which had 7 slots for games and then 1 slot for like the UI for picking a game. So you'd go into the store and say like, hey, can I get a copy of blah? And they had a list of games available. And it was not really renting. It's more like buying, but then obviously you can buy and copy something over. Or if you were crazy, I don't know, get another cartridge. But you would add games to it. And some of them were games that in fact, I think the vast majority of them were games that you could still buy a physical card of. But obviously it was more expensive to buy a game in the cartridge. So this was like a little cheaper. You would just get it flashed onto your Nintendo Power cart. And they did eventually make the service for Game Boy as well. But the Nintendo Power is kind of cool because there were games released on it that were exclusive to the Nintendo Power. Like they were not released for Super Famicom. Stuff like the Wizardry 1, 2, 3 remakes for Super Famicom. Wizardry, if you're not familiar, like very famous early CRPG series. Dungeon Crawler for PCs did pretty well, and it was like a foundational game in the RPG genre, but like huge in Japan. So it got a very loving trilogy remake for the Super Famicom that was exclusive to the Nintendo Power. Columns, which we always think of as this puzzle game for Genesis, never got a cartridge release for Super Famicom, but it did get a Nintendo Power release. And then the last game ever officially released for Super Famicom, which was Metal Slater Glory Director's Cut. And I will say Metal Slater Glory is one of these games that you could do an entire episode on all by itself.
It just sounds like a badass name.
It's an adventure game that HAL Laboratory made, and they literally poured like their entire heart and soul into this game. And it cost them a ton of money, and it took a ton of time. I think, but I'm not positive, I think Satoru Iwata was the producer for it. I'd have to go back and look. I know that Yoshimuro Hoshi was like the developer, like art, writing. Like this game was his magnum opus. It was his baby. And he poured himself into it. And I think it basically broke HAL Laboratory in a way that they had to, they eventually just became a Nintendo subsidiary, I think in part because of how this game went down.
Oh, that's too bad.
But yeah, it's cool. And I mention it too because I think it actually got a fan translation, the director's cut, this year. So if you want to go find, I'm pretty sure now it's one of those, like if you want to play the director's cut, because the Super Famicom version expands and like really kind of puts a lot of polish on the original Famicom release. So I think there's now a fan translated version of director's cut for that.
Oh, I'm gonna have to check this out. I'm so intrigued. What style game is it again? Like
Adventure.
Adventure. Okay, I'm gonna have to look into this. That's awesome. I had no idea.
Anything that HAL pours its heart and soul into tends to come out pretty good.
Yeah, I'm literally Googling like right now, like where is the fan translation? Because I want to find it.
Yeah, I don't know if it's like ROM hacking or somewhere else. I'm not sure.
Time Extension posted an article back in March of this year about it, so I might have to look into a little bit further with this. Nadia, what about you though? Any of the peripherals and add-ons you want to touch on?
I do want to touch on the SNES mouse because I actually got to see it back when Mario Paint was new and pretty cool. I had another friend who had the SNES, and she said, "Hey, do you want to come over to my house and for the weekend and we'll play Mario Paint?" And I said, "Sure, of course I did." And so her mother picks us up from school, right? And we get to her apartment and we walk in, and her brother has been playing Mario Paint, evidently, because there's a message, several frames flashing on the TV that said, like, "Hi, Nadia. Hi, friend's name. Fuck you." And and it would like kind of cycle through that, like those four,
Oh dear.
frames over and over again. And his mom sees it. She's just like, "Hey, get over here." So we did eventually get to play Mario Paint for ourselves, but that was my first impression of Mario Paint and what the mouse could accomplish. Yeah. I do remember also, speaking of like Nintendo Power, the magazine, it has some pretty cool examples of what people did with the program back in the day, but couldn't really appreciate it because you can't really see it in motion. And people would send in, I think, their VHS tapes with like their work on it to show what they did. That's crazy, man. 90s were crazy.
I miss I'm not lying when I say this. I already have a CRT TV for playing retro games on it. I want to get a VCR just so I can show my daughter VHS tapes. I really do. I know it's weird, but I want to hear that high pitched static that comes from a CRT TV that you can hear from freaking downstairs, depending on how good your ears are.
Analog horror, man.
It is funny. I remember. So this was a couple years ago now. We had some family over from my wife's side that I've never met before, and they had kids. They brought their kids, and their kids were probably like 8 to 13, somewhere in that range.
Right.
And they like games, but they like modern games. I'm like, well, I like games too, but I have a bunch of the older ones, and I wasn't really expecting them to be like that engaged. Maybe they would be, maybe they wouldn't, but I wouldn't take it personally if they didn't want to see my Super Nintendo collection,
right.
But I do remember turning on the TV and having them play Duck Hunt. They really like Duck Hunt. That's such an easy game to get into.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
But the one kid was like, "Could you turn the TV off? It hurts my ears because the high pitch, like the static that comes from it." I'm like, "Oh, kid, you would not have survived in the 90s.
You could not
that was
have
everywhere."
survived. It was a hard time for those of us who were sensitive to that kind of thing.
It never hurt my ears, but I remember being like, we would, towards the end of the 90s into the mid 2000s, the mid aughts, we would end like our household eventually had like tons of CRTs. I had a TV in my room. There was a TV, like a family TV downstairs.
Yeah.
My TV couldn't get like cable or anything, but I used it to play games and whatnot.
Yeah, same.
And so I remember my brother had my old TV up in his room after I would be down, had my, however the TVs got spaced out. But I could always tell when he left the TV on, and it just had like a black screen because I would walk. He was up on the second floor, and I'd be walking down at the bottom of the stairs, and I would just yell up. I'm like, "Mike, you have your TV on," and I would just hear. He's like, "How do you know?" I'm like, "I can hear it from here." Yeah, just that really high pitched droning sound. So I'm with you though. The mouse was really cool. I wish I remember actually getting a mouse. I don't know if it works, but
right.
I was at a like Too Many Games like years ago, like the convention Too Many Games, and I'm pretty sure at the Angry Video Game Nerds booth he was just giving away stuff, and he gave away his Super Nintendo mouse. I'm like, I'll take it. Why not?
Hell yeah.
He said it was broken, but I'm like, I don't know how could it really be broken? Come on now. that thing was like indestructible.
Was it missing its ball? Because back in the day when we had mice back in our computer lab, and it was like such a novelty, we used to get announcements every morning because kids would keep stealing the balls from the mouse.
Oh my!
Balls. And they'd say, "Stop stealing balls from the mice," and of course everyone did it more. So
you could just hear him say that again.
Yeah, basically. Pissing off the principal. What else are you going to do when you're a teenager?
I like something else. I still remember This is such a weird memory. I remember the transition of you, like the computer mice that had the balls in it, the track balls in it, to, well, it wasn't a trackball. You know what I'm saying? Like the ball at the bottom of it, to when it was an optical one, to what we have now, which is all like optical.
That was a big deal.
And I remember being like, seeing it, I'm like, oh my God, this is so much easier to use. I don't have to like clean the fucking like wheels to make sure that it spins properly.
Yeah.
God, I hated that.
And again, that was a total game changer for first person shooters.
Gaming.
Yeah.
Right? You need that because the way a trackball works is it's got a wheel inside that detects X movement and a wheel inside that detects Y movement, and the spinning of those wheels determines like the way the mouse is moving. But it makes certain like diagonals and stuff a little like imprecise because like any analog thing, it's measuring on different like what is your polling rate and what's the measurement as it spins. When we went to optical mice, like it was at the same time that adoption was coming into play was really when like this wave of first person shooters was hitting PC gaming. I won't go on too much of a tangent, but I will say for the SNES mouse, it came out a little later in the system's life cycle. Mm-hmm. And that is, in some ways, it was like, oh, it gave it some other things going for it. It was really cool that it worked with Sid Meier's Civilization, the Koei port of that, because that was a game that really, really benefited from it.
Mm-hmm.
And there were some games that, like that one, that were available somewhere else. But when you put it in and gave it that sort of SNES polish, it became all the more compelling and more accessible.
Like
yeah, exactly. SimCity is the one I was going to segue to because it's such a disappointment that the mouse doesn't work for SimCity because the SNES port of SimCity might be the definitive version of that game.
I think it's definitely my favorite.
It is beautiful. Soya Oka's music is awesome in it, and they're short loops too. They're like little 40-second loops, but they're really well constructed in a way that they fade into the background so easily. And that, it really cleans up and makes a game, the city management game that if you look at it, it's so rough on so many, it was supposed to be. It was great on Bungling Bay's map editor turned into something and it caught like wildfire because it's fun to build things. And for many people, it's just as much fun to make Bowser stomp through them. Yes. But yeah, mouse support would have been amazing for SimCity, but SimCity came out before the mouse, not after it. So it just never had a chance.
It is what it is. Something I want to touch on though. There's two add-ons I want to touch on though. Super Game Boy being the first. Which what a great idea. It is funny though. There was a proposed add-on. Just thinking of like. Sorry, I'm getting too far ahead of myself. For those who don't know, it's kind of in the name of the add-on. It's in the name of it. Excuse me. The Super Game Boy was a cartridge that you would plug into your Super Nintendo, where you could plug a Game Boy cartridge into that cartridge, and it would let you play Game Boy games on the Super Nintendo. Now, the thing that's interesting about it is that the N64, excuse me, the Super Nintendo wasn't powerful enough to emulate Game Boy software, so it literally is a full Game Boy inside the cartridge.
Yes.
That would just output the video and I guess take the controller inputs for the game, and that's literally how it worked. But it's funny because they did actually pitch. They did. You can see it in early press photos. There was going to be an add-on to do the same type of thing for Famicom games. But it was like it wasn't a cartridge that would go into slot. It was almost like a wired type of thing. Kind of,
it wasn't a ribbon cable.
Yeah, I don't know if it was a ribbon cable, but like it would basically go in through like the expansion port in some way, shape, or form. The picture I remember seeing of it, there's like a literal wire connecting the two. It's not like they were mounted on top of each other like you would see with other expansions in like other consoles of the same era here. It obviously never came out. It never there was nothing really ever came of it, but it did exist. There was thoughts to have that add-on, and it just they decided to not do it, I guess, for one reason or another. Probably cost, to be honest.
Yeah.
So the Super Game Boy was a really cool idea, though, because they pushed the Super Nintendo back a year to focus on the Game Boy. The Game Boy came out in 1989. So they probably could have released the Super Nintendo in 89, but they pushed it back a year to release the Game Boy, and it gave devs more time to focus on, especially the third-party devs, gave
it was
them
definitely
more time to polish games.
The better choice, because the Super Nintendo, as I recall, came out, at least in North America, with a pretty strong library.
And the Super Game Boy instantly expands the SNES's library by the tune of over 1,000 titles between Super Game Boy and between Game Boy and Game Boy Color, and also with certain Game Boy Color games like is it Donkey Kong? What was that? Also 94? The Donkey Kong Game Boy.
Donkey Kong 94. Yeah,
94 games, right? And just because if you played on the Super Game Boy, got the expanded color palette.
Same with Mega Man 5. You could get that too.
Right. So like it blows the game up. It kind of gives you another perspective on it versus the little cream spinach screen. So it's a terrific little peripheral, especially for somebody like me who really struggled to play Game Boy games on that small, like non-backlit screen. Being able to throw it into the SNES and get it blown up on the TV was a huge deal.
Was the Super Game Boy the first Nintendo handheld with a backlight, technically?
Oh, no.
Am I going to open up this
That's
can
one hell of a backlight.
It's just a full TV.
Take your TV on the bus.
Another one I want to shout out, though, is the Satellaview. Even though we didn't get here in North America, what a cool fucking add-on, man. It was something I will always be endlessly fascinated by in game history, is when you have bits of technology that seem so modern, but existed way before you thought they would have existed.
Exactly, yeah.
And the Satellaview was basically that. It was satellite gaming. You would literally download games from a satellite. They would broadcast games, almost like it was streamed. There's a whole Legend of Zelda game specifically released for it.
Yeah, the BS Zelda series.
BS F-Zero. There's a lot of good stuff they released that we didn't get here.
Super Famicom Wars was on Satellaview.
Right. Yeah.
There was some RPG Maker stuff. And by the way, free service. It was not a paid subscription.
What? I didn't know that, actually.
Yeah, I didn't know the part.
If you bought the hardware, you had access to the encrypted channel or whatever was being broadcast on. You'd plug it in. You'd get the wireless signal, and that was it.
I don't think the Sega channel did that.
No, yeah, the Sega channel you had to pay. I remember like Adelphia and some of the other cable companies up and down the East Coast had Sega channel, but that was all a paid subscription service.
But it's always crazy to me to see this type of thing exist. So, this is in the 90s, right? The early to mid 90s. And we consider, like online gaming and streaming and stuff like that. Though would the Satellaview be considered streaming, or would you like download games via satellite? I'm not
sure. It was streaming. Like you had to access the games at certain times of day.
Right.
Yeah.
So basically, if you were connected to it, it would pull down the necessary information. Like you could download it into memory because that's the time at which like that signal made that available.
Right.
Almost kind of like what maybe like the DS would do later on, where like if you were close by, you would be able to get the DS download play type of thing.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And the neat thing about it is it created another, I won't say opportunity, but like it created another way of presenting these games. We talked about SimCity. Like there was a SimCity city building contest that was a Satellaview thing. So like a lot of the times, not only was it that, a game was available, there was some context wrapped around the game. It was being presented in a different way.
Right.
Because it was an online thing, and it was a lot of people doing it kind of as a community. In a way that let the SNES, I'm not going to say, it's not a LAN party, right? It's not the same thing as being in a room with 8 other people playing like Unreal Tournament or early Counter-Strike. But it has the same kind of sense of community translated to the SNES in a way that was relatively novel.
That's just so cool. I feel like that's such a predecessor too of like, because you would like K-Tai games that you would get a little bit later on, because a lot of K-Tai games are kind of similar. Like you would have episodes that would come out at various intervals. I would have to check in with my buddy Rockman Cosmo about that.
Shout out to Cosmo. He's a cool dude.
Yeah, seriously.
Cosmo's awesome. He actually, it's funny. He's been on the show. What was the last time? I need to get him on the show again. Last time he was on the show was to talk about a Mario game, because it's funny. He's known for
I think I was in that.
Rockman games.
That was the Galaxy Talk. I think I was in on that.
Yes, yeah. It was you and Rockman, wasn't it, Dan?
Yeah.
He's such a good dude. And it's crazy. It's the work he's been doing over with K-type preservation is just insane.
Oh, he saved like so many games and games he wouldn't even think to save. Like,
and he's young too, isn't it?
Yeah, he's a go-getter.
All right, that's not Super Nintendo related, but it reminded me of it. Like the Satellaview, kind of like it almost makes gaming like almost appointment viewing. You know how like you would have appointment viewing or appointment based TV or whatever. I'm losing the proper term. The proper term escapes me right now, but your favorite TV show comes out, airs every Friday night at 7 p.m. So you would appointment viewing type of thing. It almost kind of did that same type of idea, but with games. Like, the next chapter of this Zelda game comes out at 5 o'clock or whatever time it is. Really freaking cool. I really love that idea. The last two things we should definitely touch on, we pretty much will. And only thing I'm going to skip just because I don't really care enough, unless you guys have any memories of it, is the Super Scope.
I did not really.
I'll just say briefly on the Super Scope, I got to do most of those games for the SNES book because I had a Super Scope growing up, and I had a CRT, I had gorgeous Trinitron and the whole setup to do it. It is a lot of fun. It's a very limited set of games that it's got, and they don't really expand or get creative with it. It's hard to. You've basically got this bazooka on your shoulder. But I will say, if you've never played them, the two Battle Clash games are terrific.
They always looked cool to me,
and they are both so fundamentally different. Played with the bazooka on your shoulder, people like I've got an emulator, I can play with them. It's like, don't play with an emulator on the mouse. It's trivially easy if you do that. It's so different to play it. The whole game's designed around having this bazooka on your shoulder. And they're a ton of fun. They're not enough of a reason to justify all the pain and expenditure to like get the setup to do it. But if you have the opportunity, they're both a ton of fun.
Then the last two ones that I think are definitely worth bringing up, the Super Effects chip, just because if without it, we wouldn't have Star Fox and we wouldn't have Yoshi's Island.
I agree.
Super important addition. It's interesting where like the Famicom was so known for their memory mapper chips that really expanded the capabilities of the system, and the Super Famicom didn't have as many. Like it had them. Like there were. In fact, I looked it up. I'm not going to read them all here. There's a ton. There are a lot of like add-on chips for various Super Nintendo games, but they're a lot more like kind of one and done type of things, with the exception of like the big ones like the Super FX, which this Star Fox, Yoshi's Island, eventually Star Fox 2, Stunt Race FX, yes. So like that was really cool, and all. I mean, it gave the system 3D capabilities, very rudimentary 3D capabilities, but 3D capabilities.
Star Fox is still a great game. I still play it once in a while. Star Fox the original.
It's Star Fox, the original Star Fox. It's funny. I talked about a similar thing on the Donkey Kong Country episode I did last year, but because I grew up with the N64. I didn't realize how many sound effects and samples they took from the original games, like for both Donkey Kong 64 and Star Fox 64 in comparison to their originals. Like I had no idea how much is like, that Donkey Kong Country basically influenced Donkey Kong 64, which is obvious now. I mean, it's the same goddamn developer. But as a kid, when I first was getting into all this stuff, I'm like, wow, this is really like, why does this all look so similar? And then when I was playing Star Fox, the original one, I'm like, wow, all these sound effects are like the same. Not in a bad way, but like I see the influence with it.
Yeah.
The last thing, of course, is the Super Nintendo PlayStation, the system that, a very condensed version of the story, because you could talk about this in a PlayStation retrospective as well, which I think it would be a better place to go into it in more detail. But Sony and Nintendo had a partnership where they were going to build a CD-based add-on to the Super Nintendo called the Super Nintendo PlayStation or something like that. And Nintendo basically screwed Sony over, where they had a whole working prototype. Like there's prototypes that have been sold on eBay and stuff like that. Like they exist, you can find them. And they basically screwed over Sony by basically reneging on their deal without telling them they were reneging on their deal. And they partnered with Philips, and they announced the product with Philips literally right before Sony was going to announce their product with Nintendo. And I believe it was at like the same trade show or something like that.
Yeah, it was at the same CES, I think.
It was at the same CES, yeah. So Sony, justifiably so, was pissed, beyond pissed. And they ended up saying, F you, we're going to screw you guys. We're going to release it anyway.
The same Ken who worked on the SNES sound chip turns around and starts running with the creation of the PlayStation.
And if we did not have the Super Nintendo, we would not have the PlayStation, which is a crazy thing. But in like a weird, spiteful way, we wouldn't have the PlayStation.
In one last, it's not technically hardware. It's technically it's a controller. It's hardware.
Oh, go for it.
We talked about earlier with Hudson. The Super Multitap was also made by Hudson. That was a third-party peripheral that added 4-player support. And there are some tremendously fun 4-player games for the SNES. It came with Super Bomberman. Super Bomberman came with the multitap, but Super Bomberman was blast, literally and figuratively. Secret of Mana is transcendent when you play it with 3 people instead of it with 1. NBA Jam. I don't know if you remember.
Is it the shoes?
Like also playable with 4 people. So there were just some really special multiplayer games that were possible, again, because of a third-party peripheral.
So many cool things. All right, so I want to start moving towards the end of the episode. We are running a bit short on time, so instead of going into a big discussion on some of our favorite games, which I could eventually do full episodes on, why don't we just list some of our favorite games? I'm going to start off with you, Nadia. Just what are some of your favorite games for the Super Nintendo? I feel like I've already touched on I mentioned a couple already, but for just so we can get some definitive lists going on here of personal favorites. What are some of your favorites on the system?
Oh, yeah. I mean, gosh, any of the RPGs, but specifically Secret of Mana, Final Fantasy 6/3, Final Fantasy 4/2, Mega Man X, of course, the Mega Man X series in general. Like, even though X2 and X3 aren't quite as good as X, they're still worth playing. Breath of Fire, that had its start on the Super Nintendo. That's a great, long neglected RPG series that needs some love and care. And there's Yoshi's Island, Mario World, as we said before.
Oh, so many good ones.
And Donkey Kong Country, as we said before. There's just so many great games. You could. I think the SNES is one of my desert island systems. Like, if I was stuck on a desert island, I wouldn't mind having one.
I would probably agree with you on that. Dan, what about you, though?
I'll just do a quick shout out to some of the stuff we didn't get, because there's a bunch of amazing games that were exclusive to Super Famicom.
Nice point.
Tales of Fantasia, Gun Hazard, Front Mission Gun Hazard, although Europe did get it, Terranigma, Star Ocean, Live a Live, Seiken Densetsu 3, Gunman's Proof, Bahamut Lagoon, and those were all just RPGs. There were a half dozen Megami Tensei games, a few Picross games, 3 Fire Emblem games, the Proteus series.
Wow. Yeah.
We got Legend of the Mystical Ninja, which is a ton of fun. Weirdly, like, awfully localized manual, but there's a bunch of other Goemon games. The Firemen, Sanrio World Smash Ball. I have fond memories of playing that in the old Retroware, like, hanging out at MagFest.
Oh, sweet.
Group. So yeah, there were a ton of games. Like, you think about all the amazing games that we had, and then there's just another entire stack of stuff we didn't get.
Absolutely. Yeah, you pointed out some great games that came out at the end of the Super Famicom's life that we had no hope of ever getting here, because for the RPGs, they were just too large to translate. Like, the text would take up too much memory, quite literally. But yeah, Seiken Densetsu 3, we only just recently got that as Adventures of Mana or Adventure of Mana, Trials of Mana. I can't remember.
Trials, I think.
So, and Tales of Fantasia, like, we had a really terrible port on the Game Boy Advance, but yeah, otherwise, Star Ocean, as you said, a lot of those came to the PlayStation as well, because it was really straddling that line.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I'm only going to shout out one actually because I feel like y'all both shout out so many good ones, and the only reason I'm picking this one out of all of them is it's because it's a game that still makes me happy, even though it's not even nostalgia talking. It's Super Mario World. I know that's cliche,
yeah, no,
but
it's a good game.
If I'm having a tough day, I will just turn on Super Mario World, not even to like try to beat it, just play through like the first area, like the first island, and it's just such good vibes. The music is so fun, the visuals are so bright and colorful. And in some ways, like the Super Nintendo is known for kind of its like pastels and muted colors that you would see in a lot of like, especially in like Final Fantasy and stuff like that.
Yeah.
The Super Mario World is so different by comparison. It's very bright and vivid, and it just gives me good vibes, makes me happy, even if it's not, I don't end up beating it. Just a fun way to kind of decompress after a tough day. Just play a little bit of Mario World. So I want to wrap up this episode, one final section of our conversation on the Super Nintendo before we do outros. Oh, actually, sorry, I have some wonderful thoughts from my listeners. Actually, you know what? Let's do the thoughts from the listeners real quick, and then we'll do the legacy. So I only have 3 to read, so don't worry. It's not gonna we're not gonna be here forever. The first one though, pretty long, from my buddy Parallax Puddles. The Super Nintendo was a pivotal system for me, for sure, as I'm sure it was for most of the people my age. It was not my first foray into video games. That title is left to the TurboGrafx 16 that my uncle had. We would play some racing game and Vigilante, but I digress. The Super Nintendo was the console that actually made me fall in love with video games. I never had one growing up, but my mother and father had friends that I would go to see once or twice in the year, and their son had the Super Nintendo. I hated going over there at first because it was boring and, blah, 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 parent chat. While the kids were trying to figure out what to do and would get antsy. But the first time they pulled out the Super Nintendo, I was completely smitten by it. I remember sitting there while the boy pulled out Mega Man X and loaded it up, completely enamored by the intro level music, the colors, the general look of X signified my first love for the mecha genre as a whole. Moving on to the next game, as a few levels were failed, he handed me the controller and said, "Have you ever played Super Mario?" I said no. I pressed the power button and damn near passed out because of how much I love the look and feel of Super Mario. I must have sat there and played all by myself for at least 2 hours while the party finished up. The next time I love memories like this, man.
Yeah.
He continues, the next time he went over, he pulled out Primal Rage. And damn, man, what a great game for a budding child. Dinosaurs, giant apes, venom-spitting dragons. As we played, I realized the health bar and how the heart would beat faster and eventually explode once killed, and I lost my mind. I had no idea how awesome games were, having not had any at home. Eventually, as time went on, we all grew up, and he went to college long before I got into high school, and he took the Super Nintendo, so I never really got to play it again. Those times I did get to play it really stuck with me, though. That's it. That's from Parallax. That's really nice like recollection of it. I love that. Next one up, Doug Leaf from the Nostalgium Arcanum podcast. The Super Nintendo was a pivotal moment in my personal gaming history, and I suspect for games as a whole. The change from the 8-bit visuals and the soundscapes of the NES to the Super NES felt like the Wizard of Oz going from black and white to color. The sweeping scores, thank you Squaresoft, and a capacity for more ambitious level design and storytelling firmly planted games as a medium and heralded where they would go next. I have vivid memories of first getting my hands on Super Mario World and faking being sick to stay home from school and play Final Fantasy IV. Games may have grown since, but I don't think I've ever felt them grow in such a revolutionary way as they did during that console generation.
I agree.
Well put, Doug.
Okay.
Final one from Mask Keaton, friend of the show, much shorter than all the others. Triple the buttons of the NES controller. That was kind of intimidating at first. So many amazing RPGs. My Super Nintendo wouldn't play Star Fox, so I had to mail it to Nintendo to get it fixed.
Oh.
I put South Park stickers on my Super Nintendo. I don't even know where I would have gotten South Park stickers. And that's what Keaton wrote.
That's South Park are looking at like 98.
Yeah, like that's when he wrote that, I was like, that's an interesting way to frame that. South Park on the Super Nintendo. So thank you all to everyone who wrote in. Our last segment here is just legacy, and I know I have a couple different questions in the notes. We're just going to keep it to this one. Why is the Super Nintendo still important today? I think that's a good way to talk, because that's honestly what legacy is. Like, how did it impact gaming and generations going forward? Dan, I'll start off with you. What do you think the legacy of the Super Nintendo is? How does it still impact us today?
I guess I'll be brief. The Super Nintendo is, in a weird way, it's so dated now. My students come in and take classes. Like, I grew up playing, PS4.
Kill me.
And right, it ages you very quick when you hear things like that. But it's kind of this bizarre, almost Criterion Collection style thing now, where for so many different genres, we have this concept of like art appreciation, where you go back and look at certain creators and certain movements in art, and you explain why they're important and some of the principles that are there, and how they contribute to the overall understanding of art. And we don't have that for games yet. Game appreciation is something we've been chasing for decades. And I think the Super Nintendo is unique, not necessarily unique, but very important, at least, in that there's so much appreciation that can be done for so many titles that you can really take 50 to 75 titles on this platform and hold them up as examples of not only defining, but exemplifying certain genres and certain design decisions and patterns. There's a reason I chose FF6 for my thesis game, for my master's degree. And a lot of it was that it had so many points, expanded on its genre in so many ways, the way it told its story in so many ways, that it was a very important thing to capture and describe. But I could have picked so many other titles in so many other genres and shown how the games that the SNES had at that time were so important that it really is the system you could go to and say, if I wanted to understand what it is to make a 2D game, this is the one console I would say you can go there. If you study it, if you understand it, you can make truly great 2D games. 3D is a whole nother kettle of fish, and there's so much that goes into that it could be a half dozen different things that you're looking at. But if you really want to make like 2D raster sprite based 16, even 8-bit, like if you want to study how to make a great 2D game, it's the first place I'd send anybody.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't have anything to add to that. Nadia, what about you? What are your thoughts on the Super Nintendo's legacy?
I think the Super Nintendo's legacy is this is something that I brought up in my own book, Plug, which is coming out early next year, From Pixels to Pros, is what video games taught me about storytelling. And I mentioned at some point that the SNES, and particularly games like Final Fantasy VI, really elevated the just video games as a storytelling medium. And I think the SNES's vast RPG library was a big part of that. So to me, the SNES legacy means one of improved video game writing. Of course, it can still be improved, but it was, to me, like, I know for a fact that I read Sakaguchi when he was working on Final Fantasy VI, his wife gave birth, and that's why you have a similar scenario within the game. So it's just like, here is Sakaguchi taking something very significant from his personal life and translating it into a game scenario, which is basically is art. What else can you call it? So I just feel like maybe the Super Nintendo helped elevate the just video games in general as an art form and a form of expression.
I definitely agree with that. And I think back to what Doug wrote earlier on, where he was talking about how, like, it took what was a pastime and made it into it took like a little, it's something that was like, mildly artistic. I'm not saying older games were not like art.
Of course.
Like,
right.
But the system elevated it to something where you have to kind of start taking it seriously. Like, even people who don't necessarily like games or think games are interesting have to like understand that there is like the game is asking questions of you about morality, or not the game, the games on the system have started asking you questions more consistently about morality and the human
Which
condition
wasn't new,
and stuff like that.
to be fair. Like, of course, Lord British had that going on also since the Apple II. But just with the NES, I think maybe, of course, developers could and did make art and statements through the NES, but they were also very busy trying to figure out how to make the system work and how to make video games work in a way that wouldn't make them crash again and make everyone in North America hate them and stop buying consoles once again.
Mm-hmm. And especially the first party stuff with the NES, it was very well understood that they were marketing, designing, and intentionally targeting school age children with the NES. And that was like baked into the plan. You realize that a decade later, when you're making SNES games, that the built-in audience that you have is older and is ready for more mature stuff. And you guys mentioned it as well. I'll just kind of caveat here. Computers and other consoles, but really the computer, like, had these deep, mature, emotional conflicts, but to bring it to a mass market the way the SNES did is a big deal. That you are basically, you dispel some notions and you change some minds when you take something that is perceived to be certainly in the case of the NES, a child's toy, and you show that it can also be a vehicle for, you know, a more mature line of narrative. And that's a big deal because you definitely had it with computers, but the computer audience was prior to the World Wide Web and the adoption of computers in the late 90s in the households. Like, we had good computer adoption in the 80s and early 90s, but it was a different group. It was a different, it was a different subculture entirely. And it did not migrate out into the really did not migrate out to the mass market in the mainstream until the world, the World Wide Web and high-speed internet in the late 90s, early 2000s. So the Super Nintendo was this first exposure for a lot of people to mature storytelling in games because it was a much smaller segment of people that were playing computer games at the time.
For sure.
And think about like who was the market who was the main demographic of PC gaming back then too, like it was generally older people, not saying old people, but like middle-aged to like young adults, right? Like, so I think you both kind of got it right with that, where the Super Nintendo was the mass market version of something that had existed prior, but now it could get to more people. One last thing, this is a very quick thing, just thinking about, things being more mature. You can't get much more mature. There was another add-on. There's a game, or there's a software, it wasn't a game, that was going to allow for online banking on the Super Nintendo for adults. It never came out, but like it would have come with like a custom keyboard controller that you could have done online banking on your Super Nintendo. So
that's what I want a console for.
Just so when the kids are done with Legend of Zelda, you can check your stocks. Well, check how much money
you can be an adult.
You can be an adult. And no, the last thing I will actually say in terms of what our conversation was, like how the games evolved in a more like in terms of storytelling and all this other stuff. I always give the example, like when people, if someone knows, I'm kind of getting to know someone and I talk about how much I like games, and I mentioned how you'd be surprised some of the thematic stuff, even going back to, the Super Nintendo. And I give the example of Cyan in Final Fantasy VI. It's a dumb name, but the Doom Train, like the fact that his wife and kid are murdered, poisoned, and he sees them going to the afterlife on the Doom Train, and he's left with this conundrum of like, I could be happy forever and go with them. They're right there. I could see that is a really heavy story beat that you encounter in a game that at the time, once again, like you said, Dan, was perceived as a child's toy, as something for kids. And here you're grappling with this mortality issue of like a man still in grief over the loss of his wife and child. It's intense. And the Super Nintendo brought all of that.
Now you're playing with Super Plot.
That is a great way to wrap up this conversation, Dan. Thank you so much. We're finally done. This is the end of the episode. Thank you all so much for listening. And Dan and Nadia, thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure.
Let's wrap this one up, though. Let's send off the listeners. For my listeners, we'll start off with you, Nadia. Where can the good people find you online if you're to be found online? And is there anything you would like to promote?
Yeah. Hi, my name's Nadia Oxford. I am mainly with the Axe of the Blood God podcast. So 10 years old. We do shows about podcasts. We do shows about RPGs, old and new, Eastern and Western, every Saturday. We're not streaming them live currently because we had to undergo a bit of a shift, but we are getting back into that as soon as Eric settles back into his job at Game Informer. But I'm also on Retronauts a lot. You can, of course, support these shows at patreon.com/bloodgodpod or patreon.com/retronauts. I also do a great deal of writing. Some of it you can find in bookstores like the Mega Man X Maverick Hunter Field Guide and the Robot Masters Field Guide, which I wrote with my husband, both with my husband, actually, David Oxford. I'm around. You'll find me. Again, keep an eye out for my book next year. Keep an eye on my socials, and you'll find out all about that. That is at Blue Sky Nadia Oxford. And Bob's your uncle.
All right. Dan, what about you? Where can the good people find you online? And is there anything you'd like to promote?
Sure. So I'm Daniel Greenberg. I'm a professor of computer game design at George Mason University. If you've ever wanted to learn how to make games, we've got a great 4-year program that you can find at game.gmu.edu. I'm also the founder of Winter Ion Game Studios. We're going to be celebrating our 10th anniversary of Ion Gaming on December 11th. It was originally started as kind of a creative clearinghouse. We've got a long-running Let's Play series, Ion Gaming, on YouTube. We do a lot of conventions throughout the United States. We'll produce academic panel lectures. In the last couple of years, we've also expanded into doing kind of larger form work. We helped put on the Adventure Game Fan Fair in Tacoma, Washington in 2024. In 2025, we put our heads together and worked on Roberta Vaughn's FMV Zone, which was sort of a tribute to full motion video games in honor of the late Roberta Vaughn, who had wanted to do that. So that was something we put on at Portland this year. I am also a contributing writer, editor, technical assistant, and kind of Swiss Army knife for the Ultimate Nintendo series of books. You can find those through Content Crew Productions at ultimatenintendo.com. If you want to chat, I'm available through Blue Sky at winterion.com. And we've got a couple things in the works for next year, including a heretofore unannounced book and I'll likely be wading into the realm of streaming as the Ion Gaming cast is kind of, we've scattered a little bit to four winds with some of us moving to different directions. So we're going to be looking to start doing some online streaming as well in the next year.
Sweet.
All right. As for myself, you can follow me on Blue Sky at stillloadingpodcast.com, on Instagram at stillloadingpod, and technically on Twitch at stillloadingpod, where I stream whenever the hell I feel like it or am able to. Just follow me on there and you'll know when I go live. If you want to support the show, you can do so in a number of ways. You can give it a 5-star rating or review on whichever podcasting app you use. It pleases the algorithm god, so I'm hoping it helps people find the show, but it makes me feel warm and fuzzy. That's always a plus. Mm-hmm. You can also support the show over at Patreon, patreon.com/stillloadingpod. For only $1 a month, you get all the episodes a little bit earlier with better audio quality, as well as access to patron voting rights, which I mentioned the backlog month polls, but I also do quarterly polls throughout the year, so you can help guide the direction of the show through that. For $3 a month, you get all the stuff at the previous tier, plus patron shoutouts, which you heard at the beginning of this episode. For $4 a month, you get all the previous 2 tiers, plus 2 mini bonus episodes every single month, which now that this comes out, I've hit 100 of those. There's 100 mini bonus episodes at that tier, tons of extra content for you, ranging from delving through all 201 of those like Gamer 5 portable systems from my arcade that has 221 games, 220 games, excuse me, and I covered them 8 at a time over the course of like 2 years. So if you want to know about Curly Monkey and its sequel, Curly Monkey 2, it's all over there.
Electric Boogaloo.
There's some wild shit on that system, or whatever else I'm interested. I've done some episodes on Wheel of Time because I've been reading that book series and it's been fun. That's all at the $4 level. And finally, the last tier I have is a $5 level. You get all the stuff, the mini bonus episodes, the voting rights, the patron shoutouts, plus access to my monthly movie podcast, where at the time this episode comes out, is called Still Muppeting, the only Muppet movie podcast where me and a bunch of friends play the music, light the lights, and we talk about some Muppets on the show at that time, at that night, whatever. I lost the rhyme. But yes, so Still Muppeting. At the time this comes out, we will have the first episode out, and then Muppet Christmas Carol is coming out either soon or already has come out. And prior to that, though, I did all the Fast and Furious movies. That was still Family. And all the James Bond movies. That was still Bonding. So tons of movie-related content at the $5 level. And that's all over patreon.com/stillloadingpod. But that's it. That is all the time I have for you on this episode of Still Loading. Thank you all so much for listening. Nadia and Dan, thank you once again for joining me.
A pleasure.
No problem. Good to be here.
And with all that said, listeners, I will see you all next time.